What's up, YouTube? It's the one and only legend of winning, aka Low, and I'm back with another episode of the NBA preview. Now, for those out there who missed the last episode, as always, I will have an annotation in the top right hand corner, a link in the description, and if you watch the video in its entirety, not only will I have an annotation to the last episode, but also have an annotation to a playlist with all of the episodes in the NBA preview, so you can binge watch and catch up where we are right now. Now, with that being said, in today's video, we will talk about the Los Angeles Clippers and why they may actually be a little bit better even without Chris Paul. But before we actually get into this next upcoming season, let's do a quick review of what happened over the past couple of years because it has been very interesting. So for those out there who are unaware, Chris Paul joined this organization 6 years ago, and within that last 6 years, Chris Paul has had a remarkable run as an individual. However, it came to an end over the last couple of months when he demanded a trade, and he is now playing for the Houston Rockets in a backcourt with James Harden. Now, a lot of people are speculating what exactly happened with this organization. Now, when it comes to Chris Paul and his inability to win, I'm not necessarily blaming it all on him, but I understand why he would want to leave from the organization because it definitely seems like the Houston Rockets are better suited for a winning opportunity than the Los Angeles Clippers, even with Chris Paul on the team. Now, with that being said though, there's been a lot of speculation on that's actually not the reason why he left from the organization. You have multiple people accusing Doc Rivers and his inability to trade Austin Rivers and so on and so forth. And you know what, here, I'll just play this as the clip of the day for our summer of social media.
Per the LA Times, Rivers said, quote, "He left because he wanted to be with James Harden. Let's not get that twisted." More rumors point to CP having issues with Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, and Rivers' alleged special treatment of his son, Austin Rivers.
This Clippers-Knicks talks, Carmelo had control over that because he would have had to, it wasn't like that he nixed it. Carmelo had control. So even if there was an offer made, Carmelo was not waiving his no-trade clause, so that's a moot point. The biggest reason I believe he left the Clippers is because they showed in their meeting with him 2 days ago that they were not willing to offer the 5-year max contract.
I'm sorry.
Now let's get something clear. I don't necessarily know what's going on. I'm not going to act like I know what's going on. Now, from my understanding, there's several stories, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to Doc Rivers. And when it comes to Doc Rivers' 2 titles, especially because now Jerry West is now part of the organization, which is a great move, you have to be really concerned about Doc Rivers and the power that he holds in that organization. You more likely will come to the conclusion that there's a possibility that Doc Rivers having 2 roles with the organization is a little bit too much for him to handle, and he should just stick to being a coach. And honestly, I think we'll figure out by the end of the season. I believe that Doc Rivers, as a general manager or the person who makes the final decision with the organization, I think that run will be over by the end of the season, and I think that's a huge reason why Jerry West is now part of this team. And if I am Ballmer, I would definitely look into shifting some of that power, if not all of the power, when it comes to personnel decisions and trading and signing players to Jerry West, because Jerry West has a track record that is vastly impressive when it comes to that part of basketball. Now, with that being said, let's transition into our depth chart and our contracts, because when you look at some of these additions, I definitely feel as if Jerry West had a lot to say so with some of these players. First, we're going to look at the contracts. Since they did not bring back Chris Paul, Blake Griffin was going to receive that max contract, 5-year, $173 million. Then we have Gallinari, who's on a 3-year, $65 million contract. Willie Reed, who's on a 1-year deal, along with a couple of other players as well. And shout out to my man Melo for signing that 2-year, $12 million contract. And actually, speaking of Melo and jumping down to the expiring contracts, he is on a player option on that 2nd year, which is why I have him as an expiring contract. I don't necessarily know if they're going to keep him after this season, especially if he doesn't produce the way that they want him to produce, but it's still going to be very interesting to see how he's going to be able to fixate his type of offense on this organization, because he is definitely a phenomenal passer. Also, when it comes to expiring contracts, we do have Wesley Johnson, Lou Williams, and Austin Rivers, which again will be very interesting to see what the team does with Austin Rivers in this next upcoming season. However, he does have an option at the end of his contract as well. Now, with that being said, let's look at his depth chart real quick. At the point guard position, we got my man Melo. At the 2, we have Pat Bev. At the 3, Gallinari. And at the 4 and the 5, obviously, we have one of the cutest couples in the NBA, DeAndre Jordan and Blake Griffin. Now, coming off the bench, we have a pretty solid bench, in my opinion. Austin Rivers, Lou Williams, Sam Decker, Willie Reed. Shout out to my man Wesley Johnson. I think he's going to receive some minutes as well. And Harrell. I understand this is only an 11-man lineup. I really don't necessarily know where else they're going to be lacking. possibly in the power forward position, but I honestly believe they're just going to play some small ball, move Decker Decker or possibly Wesley Johnson to the 4 coming off the bench for Blake Griffin, and I think that's what they're going to run coming off that bench. And also shout out to my man Lou Williams. He had a phenomenal season last year, and I think he's going to have another great year because he is on expiring contracts. And some of the sleepers on this team, Austin Rivers, Gallinari, Sam Decker. Austin Rivers gets way too much flack just because he is a coach's son. It's not like he asked to be on his team. Sam Decker was underutilized in Houston. First year, he only played 3 games. Second year, 77 games. However, only played 18 minutes per game. And within those 18 minutes, he was a pretty solid contributor to the team. And then when it comes to Gallinari, I feel like a lot of people are overlooking Gallinari simply because he's been suffering from injuries. Now, don't get me wrong. If he's injured, it's not going to help this team whatsoever. But when he is healthy, he is borderline a 20-point scorer with ridiculous shooting splits, almost 50, 40, 90. And because he's 6'9", 6'10", you can play that small ball lineup, putting him at the power forward position and Blake Griffin at the 5 and really spacing out the floor. But if there is one player that we have to highlight, one player that we really have concerns for, one player that I think a lot of people are speculating and maybe even underestimating at this stage in his career, it has to be Willie Reed. No, I'm just playing. Shout out to my man Blake Griffin because he is our spotlight player of the day. Blake Griffin is a 6'10" power forward who spent his entire career playing for the Los Angeles Clippers, and over the last 7 years there's been a lot of ups and downs. In the beginning of his career, practically the height of his career when he was consistently healthy, Blake Griffin was an athletic phenom, dunking on everyone who dared to get in his way, showed a lot of promise when it comes to his ability to handle the ball and pass it, especially for that position, and was a solid rebounder, especially when you consider that DeAndre Jordan was grabbing somewhere around 12 to 14 boards consistently over the last 3 to 4 years. Now, when it comes to Blake Griffin, I personally am split, and I know a lot of people are split as well. If you want to be a little bit more pessimistic, I thoroughly understand why you would be so. Blake Griffin on the defensive end just is not that impressive whatsoever, and I honestly would wish that he would try a little bit harder defensively, but you know, it is what it is. And then when it comes to the offensive end, yes, he is impressive, phenomenal, and he has a lot of promise and talent on that side of the ball, but he doesn't stay healthy enough to display those talents, so what is the point? However, if you want to be a little bit more optimistic, and that's where I'm going to lean in this video, Blake Griffin, if he is healthy, I definitely can see him taking a next step. Not necessarily saying that he's going to be like this 30-point scorer on his team, but I think we're going to be able to see a side of Blake Griffin that we only see spurts of because Chris Paul was on the team. Now, I'm not blaming Chris Paul here, but because Chris Paul is a dominant ball handler, it really took the ball out of Blake Griffin's hand, and he basically became a traditional power forward, trying to bang down low with some of the bigs, even though he does not have any post moves whatsoever, finishing around the rim. And like I said before, as time continued to progress, he added a little bit of a face-up game to his arsenal. But Blake Griffin, in my opinion, he's so much more than that. I've seen Blake Griffin catch the rebound, push the break, make perfect passes. I've seen Blake Griffin, even in a half-court set, be a really good passer, which is why even with Chris Paul, he was a consistent 4 to 5 assists per game. And so when it comes to Blake Griffin and his ability to be a dominant offensive player, and yes, I did say dominant because I definitely see that out of Blake Griffin, I know everything depends on him staying healthy. I know everything depends on the spacing problems that potentially could arise with Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan. And now that Chris Paul is out of the lineup and you're starting Melo, that also gives me a little concerns as well. But I saw Blake Griffin multiple times without Chris Paul on the floor where they were running some lineups that were really shaky, especially when Chris Paul was hurt and he missed an abundance of games consistently, and Blake Griffin consistently impressed. So because of those dynamics with Blake Griffin, his lack of defense, his injury problems, however, his potential on the offensive end, that's the reason why I'm split. And so I don't necessarily know what to expect out of Blake Griffin this year, but I will say this: if Blake Griffin misses, I'll say 30 to 40 games this upcoming season, I do not see this team making the playoffs without Blake Griffin. And so that's a very huge burden for him to shoulder. But I think this year is the year for him to have a great season, and hopefully he'll be able to keep this team afloat even without Chris Paul, which then leads us to our question of the day. Shout out to my man OTD NBA History, and his question is, will this be Blake's best season as a pro, and is it time to rebuild yet again, or can it be avoided? Cheers. So, two-part question. One, when it comes to Blake Griffin and this being potentially his best season throughout his entire career, I agree. This year, Blake Griffin definitely has the potential to really live up to his full potential as a player. When you talk about Chris Paul, and again, I'm not trying to take anything away from Chris Paul because I know a lot of people are going to say that in the comment section below, but when you talk about Chris Paul, he is a ball dominant player. That is his best attribute. He handles the ball, facilitates to others, and I just don't think Blake Griffin is best utilized that way. He's not a traditional power forward. He's a ball handler himself. He can pass the ball, and I think to thoroughly utilize Blake Griffin, you have to put the ball in his hand, especially in a half-court set. So when you have that type of opportunity with Blake Griffin, along with the fact that Blake Griffin needs to prove to himself, along to the rest of the league, that he can indeed stay healthy and be one of the best players in the NBA, because not too long ago, he was an MVP candidate. Not too long ago, I think a lot of people were debating between him and Anthony Davis, or at least putting the respect to his name, calling him a top 10 to top 15 player. And obviously, as time has continued to progress, his body has deteriorated with injuries. But I personally feel because he's added that mid-range shot to his game, that he still can provide us with enough evidence to prove that he is one of the best players in the NBA. And I'm expecting this year for him to average 25 plus points, 9 rebounds, 5, maybe even 6 assists as a power forward, which would be phenomenal, something that we rarely see in the NBA. Now, when it comes to the rebuilding part, I believe this question was asked before Blake Griffin signed his contract, so that's out of the question. But when it comes to Blake Griffin, the Clippers, DeAndre Jordan, Doc Rivers, this whole era, the last 6-7 years, let's get something clear for the people out there who are not Clipper fans. And I'm not a Clipper fan either, but I'm just realistic. This is by far the most success that this organization has ever seen in franchise history. So let's get that clear. So when people talk about rebuilding, I understand that this team is not going to win a championship. I get that. You get that. Clipper fans, they know that as well. But let the Clipper fans have their moment, all right? I'm not going to bag on the Clippers because, you know, it's been a long 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It's been a long one now. So I'm going to let them have their moment and just let them rejoice. And I don't think they should rebuild, but that's my thoughts on it. Let me know what your thoughts on it in the comment section below. Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, the whole Clipper Nation itself. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell as well. And if you enjoyed this and want to continue to see some more, hit the thumbs up. But with all that being said, people, I'll see you all tomorrow. Peace.